Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keeping Score with Josh and Ray, a podcast show dedicated to bringing analysis of Rutgers sports and sports around the country. I'm Josh,
And I'm Ray.
and in today's show, we bring in guest Jake McGowan, the opinions editor at the Daily Targum, and we're going to be discussing the Big Ten's return to college football and whether we think it will be successful or doomed to fail in the current season. So I'll just start. I think it completely depends on how the players behave off the field. We've seen that the Rutgers team has had an outbreak a few weeks ago already because they were partying, and there's been other schools like I think it was LSU who almost the whole team got it, and it all just depends on if they're going to be responsible and kind of just stay home and just go to practice and not go to any parties on campus or anything. And that's going to be what it's all about, because what happened is the conference has a lot of protocols now in place. Like, they're going to be tested daily. If they're positive, they can't play for about 3 weeks, and they have to get tested constantly. So I think it can work, but it just really depends on everybody behaving themselves and not going to parties, or just kind of just not socializing in big groups, because that's how it spreads on just about every college campus nowadays. So
I mean, they definitely have to the student athletes themselves definitely have to do their part by staying away from social gatherings and things. But the thing is that you're asking a very large football program to not go to parties and stuff. And I just think that doing that, it's not the best idea. You've seen some programs already who've opened up their seasons, and they've had some outbreaks. I think LSU had an outbreak. Notre Dame, I think, had a couple of cases. So I don't really think it's the best idea for them to be doing this, considering these are still college students who are probably going to go out and have a little fun during the season.
If you're going to talk about college players or just college students in general, you can assume that they're more likely to get. They're going to go out more. They don't worry about the virus itself as much as like older people do, even if they do live with older people, because they're not more, they're less likely to get really sick or even die from it. So I feel like it's very easy to be like, oh, it's because they're playing college football. That's why they're all getting this virus. But you see college kids all around the country getting it, and most of them aren't athletes. They're just going out and they happen to get it. So I don't know if you can blame football specifically for them getting the virus. I mean, if you think about what a football practice is, yeah, I mean, they're all getting together, they're hitting each other, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're transmitting it to each other through that way. I mean, I'm sure they're getting it outside the practice field.
yeah. And the thing is like, even if like one team doesn't party, and like they do everything they're supposed to do, maybe the other team partied, and then they can transmit it to them in the game, so it's just like a lot to deal with. There's 14 teams in the conference, and it's like, everybody has to be on their best behavior for 8 regular season weeks, and then like the conference championship in December. It seems like a bit of a stretch. I do agree.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is worth giving it a shot, just because yeah, of course, from the league's point of view, from the NCAA, it brings in money. Like, everybody knows that. It's not a secret. But if it does work, then it kind of shows that sports in general are safe to play as long as the athletes are being responsible. That's kind of, I think, what the ideal goal is. But yeah, the bottom line is, it's just that we've already seen football players, especially, not been using great judgment in their personal lives with gathering. And with things like basketball, like starting in November, I'm less concerned about that, because the teams are only like 12 guys, 15 guys.
Yeah.
A lot easier to manage. Football teams are literally like 40, 50 guys, a bunch of coaches, all together, and it's just so many people to manage. So yeah, it's really all about what they do in their personal time.
Yeah, you made a couple good points there.
Mm.
I think one of the pros of them coming back, I mean, from the league's perspective, is definitely money. according to the New York Post, canceling the football season could reach $1 billion in total lost revenue for the league. So I mean, that right there kind of tells you all you need to tell you, or all you need to know about their decision. And I think it's also interesting to point out that we haven't heard anything about the other fall sports since the conference originally canceled them. I think it was on August 11th. So, I think this whole decision-making process is just revolving around money, which I don't really agree with, considering, these are lives at stake. And I think that's also been a central theme during this pandemic, this argument between money and lives and the economy. And I think the Big Ten and the other conferences that are opening up their sports again, I think that just kind of aligns with what we've been dealing with in this country this whole time.
Well, I disagree with that, Ray.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to, I think it was May or June. I want to say May, but we remember Rutgers developed that rapid testing for COVID, right? Rutgers researchers. Yeah, and where do they get the money for the research department? They don't just come and buy it. Obviously, tuition's part of it, but athletics are a big part of that. So if we're talking about like a net positive or net negative, getting that Big Ten money that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten, who knows like how the debts will kind of square out towards the end. Alabama, for instance, they were kind of a run-of-the-mill school for a while there. Like they were kind of just mediocre, average college to get into. But now they're actually improving academically because their football program brings in so much money. They're able to make improvements. And at Rutgers, those improvements show themselves in like research, medical research that could potentially save lives. I feel like it's easy to dismiss the money part of it with the money, but 5 years from now, we're all looking back at this.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny because like when you think of like big organizations like that making money, you think it all goes to like their fancy cars and stuff, but that's not really the reality. It's like you said, like Rutgers having those, having like the coronavirus research and all that. That was like, I remember when that came out, that was like they were like national leaders in like the whole coronavirus research department. And that can only be done with having resources. I mean, think about, like how the basketball team sold out every game at the Rack this year. That made money, So, and it's like, that was a great point also with Alabama in football. I mean, their football program has been a juggernaut for years, and that is just only going to do good things for the university if they allocated the money correctly, which they did, you seem to point out. So, it's like making the university making money is not a bad thing if it can be done safely. That's just the main thing, with obviously in regards to football. So yeah, it's just it's hard to, because there's so much unknown with this thing. Like how is it going to play out with this season? It starts October 23rd. Is there going to be an outbreak the first week, or is it just actually going to work out? I mean, we've seen in the pros, the NFL is doing fine right now, and they have just the same big amount. They have the same amount of players on their roster as in college, but they're not spreading. Obviously, it's different because they're not in college, but there is some encouragement there, same with the NBA. So it's really, it's all about, again, it all goes back to the safety and behavior. But yeah, Ray, you had anything else?
Yeah, I mean, no, Jake, you definitely made a good point there. I like what you said, Josh, about, if they can make money, that's great. That could help us save lives in the future too. But, I think I still do think that this needs to be done safely. And, if you look at the protocols, just from the naked eye, they look good. They look like they're kind of tight. I don't know how they can compare to other successful programs, or programs that haven't been so successful with the coronavirus.
Excellent. I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to wait and see. There's also the thinking of like the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, these other Power 5 conferences. If they're going to do it, I mean, how much are you really doing as the Big Ten by canceling? Like, how many cases or at the end of the day, deaths are you preventing by shutting down your conference if everybody else is just playing anyway? It's like, I guess the analogy to make there, like, if you have like 10 people in your household, you have a big family, and it was early on during quarantine. If everybody else in your house is going out, what's the point of staying home for you? You know, if you're not personally at risk, you know, it feels like you're not helping anything at all because you're just one person. Then the overwhelming majority are still going to go out and do it anyway. And that was kind of the mentality that a lot of Americans had over the summer when people started breaking quarantine. They were like, well, I mean, you know, what's the point? What am I achieving by staying in if nobody else is going to do it anyway?
Right.
You know, not that that's a great mentality to have, but it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind, like for example, with the SEC, they're Southern, they're kind of conservative. You know,
Yeah.
conservatives have different thoughts about coronavirus than, you know, people up north do or liberals.
Mm.
Not to like say that everyone up north is not conservative or whatever, but it's just generally like I think it's definitely, you know, that part of it is in play in that regard where, you know, you have people like Trump, like kind of like saying like, let's bring back all the sports, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure there's a lot of supporters of his down south in the SEC area. So I think there's just different motivations depending on what, you know, where the states are, like geographically, there's just different motivations. And yeah, I think, you know, it wasn't a bad thing that the Big Ten was one of the only conferences not playing. It's like you could see it as either like, oh, there's no point of not playing, or you could see it as they're actually like leading by example and showing how the other conferences should act. It could go either way.
Well, that's what they were
So,
trying to do.
yeah.
I remember reading on Twitter, which isn't a great source, but like the day before the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were gonna cancel their season, you know, all the commentators, all the sports writers, they were like, oh, you know, we expect the entire college football season to be done tomorrow. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But then I guess the other conferences kind of call the Big Ten's bluff. The Big Ten says we're not going to play. The Big Ten probably expects every other conference to just do the same thing. But they're like, no, we're going to go forward. And then they just sissied out, basically, the Big Ten, and then they came back. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to consider at this point in the pandemic. You know, how important is football to people? I don't know. You know, I'm sure it's definitely bigger down south. It's cultural. It's part of their actual culture, especially in states like Alabama and Mississippi that don't have much else going for them. So, you know, it's kind of more important in that regard. But yeah, you know, there's a lot of trade-offs. We're at kind of like a weird stage in the pandemic where it's like it's definitely still very dangerous, but it's not like this crazy thing anymore that's like killing thousands of people a day. So people have to like think intelligently, like what's worth the risk that we're doing here, and you know, sometimes institutions have to do that too. However, I mean, once you see like NFL games, college football games, like people stopped kind of complaining about the fact that they were playing, you know, like nobody really cares anymore. You know, I was watching NFL earlier today, and you know, you didn't hear anything about the virus. They were just talking about the sport, like nothing really happened. So, you know, I guess there's going to be a lot of fighting when that decision's being made, but once it's made, you know.
Yeah, and it's like what Ray said, and what both of you said about like one, it's like it's how you just said like Alabama and Mississippi, like they're all about football, and then Ray said that's why part of the reason why they not bringing back other fall sports is because it's like the money and it's so popular. I think that is just like, you know, just because imagine if like, you know, Alabama didn't play football, you know, it would just totally just send them in a frenzy because they treat it as like religion.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like there's just so many other things to consider besides just like, oh, could they possibly spread the virus? Like, yes, but people have other motivations, and at the end of the day, during the pandemic, we're gonna have to come to terms with not everybody's mind is gonna revolve around just spreading the virus and this and that.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm sorry, Ray. I'm sure you want to get in here, but like you can die from so many things. I know this sounds very like conservative of a talking point, but like you can die from so many things. Are we just going to build our lives around this one relatively harmless illness forever? Like there has to be a point where we're like, all right, you know what? It's out there. It's like, I'm not one of those guys who says it's like the flu, but like there's risk and reward to everything. You know, we can't just like live forever in fear because of the virus being out there. Like we can't dictate our lives around it. You know, it's not like some sort of contagious cancer. It's a virus. It's dangerous for sure. No one's saying that it's not, but you can't structure life around it until, you know, it's completely eradicated. Yeah, that's it's just it's trade-offs. That's all it is. I mean, not everything's about avoiding this one particular disease, and I think it's hard to come to terms with that because of all the hysteria in the spring. It was justified hysteria, yeah, but we can't live like that forever.
I mean, just going off of that, I think that there is something to be said, though, about if, all these deaths and, all these poor health, if it could be prevented, could we be able to prevent people catching the virus by just not playing the football season? And even though it's a small number of deaths that may, result from this football season, it's still people's lives that we're talking about. So, if we just had to cancel the fall sports season for just 2020 and wait until the vaccine comes out so things are even better than they are now, then I think that's definitely something to consider. But you did make a good point that, we can't always live in fear of this. But, I think the perspective is definitely valid that we also have to take into account that, the vaccine is coming, hopefully. And if we could just hold off until then, thousands of lives can still be saved.
Mm-hmm. Well, every college football season kills people, if you want to think about it. Art Riles, he was the former head coach for Baylor way back, 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago. He was eventually fired because of the scandal over there, but he played college football when he was our age. And on the way to one of his games, his entire family died in a car crash, like all of them. So in that regard, yeah, that college season killed someone too. If they didn't hold the 19 whatever college football season, those people would still be alive. I feel like no matter what you do in this world, you're going to end up killing someone because of the butterfly effect. So this just happens to be like a more notable example of the butterfly effect. Like we're more aware of it.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying there. Like, there's always just risk whenever you step outside your house for anything to happen. But, like what Ray said about the vaccine, it's interesting because it's like if we knew like the vaccine was going to come out like in January, say if like the CDC was like, okay, we have an official estimation vaccines out in January, then they could be like, oh yeah, let's just cancel the fall and then come back in the spring, fine. But they don't know, so like what I mean? Like people just don't want to just not. They don't want to just cancel everything for like an unknown amount of time. It just creates a lot of it's just not a sustainable like business model. And I know that's just a very like capitalist thing to say, but that's just the reality of our society. That like it's going to be driven by a lot of financial incentives. So these businesses that don't have like a date in mind for the vaccine, they're going to be like, all right, let's just kind of try to have protocols in the meantime and see whenever they make the vaccine, they make it,
Yeah. Yeah, you can't operate under the assumption we're going to have a vaccine because we don't know if we do. So,
right.
That's another thing to consider. Like it's good. It's almost a good thing that a lot of these businesses are trying to reopen right now and catering or accommodating to the coronavirus in that sense. Like they're trying to organize what their game plan is right now. And the Big Ten's part of that. So I think that's good because like we don't want it to be a situation where like we don't get a vaccine for way longer than we thought, and then we're kind of screwed because we had no idea. We were just kind of banking on the vaccine. So yeah, there's so much to dissect here, though. I feel like we could talk about this for days.
Yeah, I think the main idea here is like they do have protocols. The players are getting tested every day. If they do get the virus, they have to sit out for 3 weeks. But all of that is just the only way the protocols are going to help is if the players kind of just take it seriously and don't party on campus. And that's where we're really going to be holding our breath.
Yeah.
So the season starts October 23rd, regular season for 8 weeks, conference championship in December. We'll see if we even make it that far, but yeah.
Are you kidding? No.
You guys have
see
any
if we win a game.
No, I didn't mean Rutgers winning. I meant this season.
Right.
We all know Rutgers is not going to get more than 2 wins.
Come on, don't be generous.
Yeah. So you guys have any other closing thoughts?
Risk and reward, baby. We'll see what happens. Yeah. But if there's a catastrophic rise in cases in the winter, it's not because college football decided to play.
Yeah.
Nice take right
basically, we just have to kind of trust in the players a little bit to do their due diligence and stay away from social gatherings, even though that might not be totally realistic. But like Jake said, we'll just wait and see what happens. Hopefully the best happens and we don't get a lot of cases. let alone deaths, because that would be atrocious. But we'll see what happens, and season starts on October 23rd. So looking forward to it. Yeah, so that's all for today. Join us next time on Keeping Score with Josh and Ray for more talk about the Big Ten, Rutgers sports, and even professional sports. And make sure to follow the Daily Targum on our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for more content.